evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Mahoning Drive-In Theater, the largest single-screen drive-in in the United States. We're certainly glad you could be with us this evening, and don't forget the concession stand is open with all kinds of great things to eat and drink. Welcome to Mahoning Drive-In Radio. I'm Mark, and I'm here with Mahoning Drive-In owner, projectionist, impresario, Jeff himself. Jeff, welcome back to Mahoning Drive-In Radio.
Thank you very much, Mark. It is a pleasure to be here.
So today we're basically just going to talk a little bit about your life in and outside of the drive-in so that our customers and listeners just get a sort of a better sense of who the man behind the simplex is. Okay. You've been with the Mahoning Drive-In since when?
2001.
2001. And how did you first come into this organization?
Well, the former owner of the drive-in, because I had known him for many years, he gave me a call one day and said, hey, he said, come up and see the drive-in that I just rented. And I said, I'll come up sometime. I said, but I'm not really into it. I said, I just got done running an indoor theater. I said, I'm kind of burned out right now. And he said, oh, come on. He said, come on up, just look at it. He said, I want you to see it. I said, okay, all right, I'll come up. So I went up there not expecting too much. And the first thing I see is that big marquee as I'm coming down the road. And I'm like, okay, this is, because I haven't seen a marquee like this since I was a kid in the early 60s, because most of them are long gone. And I saw that and I thought, oh, maybe this is something else, So I turned the road, I come down the road, we're about half a mile back that road. And I turned in and I thought, wow, this is a big drive-in, because I saw the screen, first of all, from the back. I thought, okay, this is a big place. So I drive in, and it was like going back in time, because most of the large drive-ins with the big center screens and big, large fields are long since gone. The ones that I went to as a kid, all torn down, all completely gone. So I drove in that first time and I thought, wow, this is really neat. It was nighttime when I got there, so I couldn't even see the whole thing. And I thought, wow, this is really interesting. So I pulled up, I parked my car, went into the building, and the concession stand, again, like going back in time. And I thought, wow, this is like being in the 50s. I thought when drive-ins were at their heyday, I thought this is great. So I talked to my friend who was running it at the time. He introduced me to the projectionist that was there at that time. Now, this is a year before I took over. This would be 2000. This would be the year before I took over. I was really impressed. I loved the place. And I stayed the whole night. And when I was ready to leave, my friend says to me, he said, how would you like to work here next year? And I thought, I'm so impressed with this place. I told you when I came up, I was kind of burned out with theaters. Radio stations have been my long-term job for years. So, yeah, I was kind of burned out. I said, but I really like this place. It's getting more and more to me the longer I stay. I said, give me a call next spring. Let me know what's going on. So we go through the off season. We go through the winter. Spring of 2001 comes, and he calls me and he says, hey, he said, how would you like to be my projectionist? And I said, I think I'd like it. I said, by now it's been a year since I was removed from my last theater. I was kind of into it again, especially at that drive-in, because I loved it, the way it looked so much. And I said, all right. I said, I'll come on board. So that's how I started in 2001 as the projectionist. And the guy that I worked for there, he started showing up less and less. Basically, he made me the manager too at about the same time. He came down for a while, but since he had an indoor theater of his own to run, he came down less and less. So pretty soon I was the manager and the projectionist.
And when you came to the Mahoning back then, it was film. The digital revolution had not really hit yet, but it was a different setup for film, correct? Or there was a platter system in there at one point. When I first started coming, it was still in the corner.
Yes. Well, yes. And that was in constant use when I took over in 2001 as the manager and projectionist. It was still in constant use. There was only one projector in the booth, and that was the one near the door. And the film ran across where the number one projector sits now and ran onto the platter. And we did that for the first couple of years. And of course, everything had to be on the platter, even the intermission reels. So we did that for the first couple of years. And then one day, the man that I worked for, like I said, he came around less and less. He came in and he said, What do you think about putting the other projector back in? And I said, well, I said, that's great. I said, but what are we going to do with it? And he said, well, why don't we put it back in? He said, we'll run the film through that projector because it'll be right next to the platter. And then the one near the door, which is the number 2 projector, we'll just use for intermission reels. We'll have to put spindles back on it and everything. He said, but we'll use that just for, I said, that's great. I said, I'd love to have 2 projectors in here again. So as much as I disagreed with him on some things, that was one of his brilliant ideas. So the projector that had been missing for many years was reinstalled. It was in storage. It was taken out of storage, reinstalled, but we still had the platter at that point. And we continued to use the one projector with the platter and the other one by itself just for the intermission reels. And we ran that way up until the time you came along, when we used the platter, a little bit less, but we were still using it. And that's kind of when you came in.
And for people who are not aware of the platter versus reel to reel, or reels, I believe, as it's referred to in the industry, the platter is a way you would connect all the reels and trailers together into one big long piece of film that would run off one level of and it was 3 platters?
Yeah, 3-tier. Yep.
So you'd put it on one level, it would run through the projector and basically recoil itself on another platter. Yes. And at that point, it was ready to go for the next show, right?
Exactly. The film would come out of the center, almost like an old 8-track. It would come out of the center, run through the projector, and then wrap up on an empty platter. And you're exactly right. You would have to take the heads and tails off of the reels of film. You'd have to hook the end of one reel to the beginning of the next with nothing in between. You'd have to splice it all together. Then you had one big roll of film on the platter, and that's how you got started.
And eventually, having the 2 projectors, as we do now, running reels, as they say, was to the theater's advantage, because as film became less and less common and more precious to the studios and collectors, they didn't want you to put it on a platter system.
No, that is a no-no now, except there may be 1 or 2 private collectors that will tell you, all right, if you run my movie, you still have a platter, okay. But no, the studios, definitely not, because there are some prints, there are some films that they only have 1 or 2 copies of anymore on 35 millimeter, and they're not going to restrike them. They're not going to make new ones. So they want them to last as long as possible. So they say, if you're going to run 35 millimeter film, now you have to put it on the original 20-minute reels and run projector to projector, reel to reel, with changeovers every 20 minutes. You're not even allowed them to put them on bigger reels like they had 1-hour reels at one time, which held 3 rolls of film, 3 reels of film. Can't even do that anymore. You do not want any splices, any heads or tails removed. You must use 20-minute reels.
And that's what I was just about to say, was that the idea of when you put them on a platter was that you had to cut the heads and the tails off so that you're essentially just seeing picture the whole time. Right. It was running through.
One complete movie, just like you would see it on television, no interruptions. But like I said, they are now considered archive prints. The studios say you have to have the old-fashioned reel-to-reel changeover every 20 minutes, or we're not going to give you the movie.
And that's what we're finding too. And again, I'm not really involved with this aspect of the theater, but what we're finding now is, in order to get films from certain archives or studios or collectors, you sort of have to be approved or certified for most of these people, don't you, at this point?
Yes. We are one of the few members of the Library of Congress as far as drive-ins go. And to become a member of the Library of Congress, I had to fill out a lot of paperwork saying that I was a licensed projectionist, knew what I was doing. They wanted to know how long I've been doing it, which has been since 78. And so they had I'd answer a lot of questions. But now if we want something from the Library of Congress, they won't have a problem shipping it to us, because they know me, basically. They know what kind of equipment we have. They asked about that. And so, yes, there is some paperwork to fill out.
So speaking of drive-ins in general, I know in the documentary At the Drive-In, available now on Amazon, DVD, and streaming, you mentioned the Super Skyway was a drive-in that you went to as a kid. Were there multiple drive-ins? I mean, what were your earliest drive-in experiences growing up?
My earliest drive-in experiences were the ones in the Allentown, Bethlehem, Easton area, and a little bit west of that. We hit them all. I would say the Super Skyway in Coonsville is the one that we went to the most often. But we did the Super Skyway. We did the West End Drive-In, the Bethlehem Drive-In, the Starlight Drive-In. Let me see. We were at the Quakertown Drive-In a couple of times, Shimerville Drive-In. But our biggest one, I would say, was probably the Super Skyway in Coonsville. That's where we went most often. And it was like the Mahoning. It was a big drive-in, single. Well, they were all single screen back then. As you've heard me say before on my announcements to the public, drive-ins on the East Coast were built with one screen and one field. Now most of them are chopped up. 2 screens, 3 screens, whatever. Everybody facing a different direction, looking at a different. And they were kind of forced into it in order to make the most money that they possibly could. Very few were left untouched. The ones that were left single screen are now the ones that are mostly gone and absolutely not in existence anymore, like the Super Skyway. It went down still as a single screen. When they tore it down, it was still single. And most of them either doubled or tripled the amount of their screens to stay in business, or they were torn down and used for other purposes. Super Skyway right now is an empty field. They tore it down to do something with it. The zoning didn't go through. It didn't get approved. It's an empty field to this day. What a waste. What a waste.
When you were going to the drive-in as a kid, was it something special to you? Was it, because I know for me, it was a different experience. I might not have seen how special it was until a little bit later in life when they started disappearing and I realized how precious a drive-in is to have these days. But like as a kid, was it just, that's just what you did, or was it sort of special or more of an event in any way?
It was more of an event because we didn't go to the drive-in, maybe once a month we went. If we went more often, like say once a week or maybe a little bit more, I don't think it would have been as special because I would be used to it all the time. But we went, I'm going to say once a month on average when I was a kid. So whether it was the Super Skyway or the West End Drive-In or the Starlight or the Bethlehem or whatever, it was really special because it was fun watching all the people milling around. We would always park where we could see the concession stand. We always parked a little bit behind the concession stand and to the left as you're looking at the screen. That was our typical parking spot. So we could see all the people going and coming out of the stand or going and coming to the playground that was under the big screen. And I, of course, would go up there and play on the playground equipment. And so it was a ball. You know, it was just a lot of fun.
It's funny you mentioned that. Everybody has their regular spot. You know, I thought about that too. And when I went to the drive-in with my family as a kid in the late 70s, early 80s, it was back and to the left. That's basically where we parked. You could look over and see the snack bar and the screen was still big right in front of you.
Exactly. It's perfect because, well, my dad, of course, he didn't want to be too close. Nowadays, I mean, you know what it's like, the Mahoning people, man, they want that front row. They want the first row because the screen is like, you know, they have to look from left to right to see the whole picture. So I understand where they're coming from. But my dad never wanted to be that close. So we would park like right behind the stand and to the left. Yeah.
That's one of the things about the Mahoning too, is that screen is so huge. I've parked when I was more of an attendant than an attendant. I've parked all over the place there, and you know, up front is great, but even if you park toward the back, the screen is so big. It's still, there's nary a bad place to sit there.
There really isn't. When I still had the platter system and I could get out of the booth for a little while. Now it's not even worth going out. I could go out for 5 minutes to hit the bathroom or get something from the concession stand and I got to come right back. But in the days I had the platter, once I started to film, I would get out of the booth. I would walk all the way to the back of the field, all the way to the very last row where the fence row is. And I would stand back there for a few minutes and think, man, this is incredible. Even in the very last row, which nobody really uses anymore, it's still a good picture. It's amazing.
There's something I've always liked about drive-ins too. If you're farther back, and it's one is the ambient sound of all the little speakers. It's almost like you're under a dome of sound. Like no matter where you walk, you can still sort of hear the movie. And the other is the reflection of the movie on the tops of all the car the car roofs and hoods if you sit in the back. It's a tiny little thing, but it's like ground-based starlight coming off the screen.
Yeah, good point. Good point. I like that. Yes. Yes.
So you mentioned in the documentary that your projectionist career began in the Air Force. What's
Yes.
sort of like your personal history with just film handling in general? Did you have a Super 8 projector at home as a kid? Did you have a 16 projector? I mean, what led you to the point you're at now?
I did. I go so far back. I didn't have a Super 8. I had a regular 8 projector at home when I was a kid. My dad bought it for me. I think I'm going to say I was around 6 or 7, maybe, when he bought that. And he had bought a couple of those little uh, castle reels, those little like 10-minute reels of films. And he bought me a handful of them to start out with. And I would watch them constantly. Uh, didn't realize it at the time, but part of the fun was just running the projector, which an 8 millimeter or even a Super 8, there's not that much to them, but it was just the idea of projecting something back then on the wall and, getting it focused and getting it framed and then just watching the movie that just got into my soul. And over the years, I did it in high school with the 16 millimeters. Nowadays, the kids in school, they don't even have 16 millimeter anymore, but they certainly did when I was in middle school and in high school. And I was part of the audiovisual club. I ran the projectors for the classrooms, and it just got into me for some reason and stuck with me all my life.
Speaking of film, as we often do, what would you say is your favorite movie or are among your favorite films? What kind of films do you watch when you're not being paid to do so?
Film noir. So we're talking 40s, most of the 50s, a little bit late 30s. They were doing things with the shadows and the black and white. Um, so yeah, in around that area, middle late 30s up through the 50s is what I usually watch when I'm at home alone. And I have a decent collection of film noir on disc, and I do enjoy those movies. But basically, from the Mahoning, I mean, I'll run anything and get some enjoyment out of it. Even though I'm stuck in the booth most of the time, I do catch bits and pieces. So I really enjoy everything that I run, whether I'm at home or at the drive-in. It's great.
So when you're not at the drive-in,
Yes.
what do you do for work, for fun, for staying one step ahead of the law?
Yeah. I am very much a homebody. I love going to work. I work at a radio station. That is my full-time job. I should say the theater is a full-time job when we're open. Now, during the off season, I still have some paperwork to do, but it's not that intense. When we're open, I'm at the radio station during the week and I do my radio station work, and then I flip the books and I start on the drive-in stuff. So it's like having two jobs during the summer, but that is my other job. I'm a traffic manager at my radio station, which means I'm responsible for entering the contracts, making sure the commercials get on the air, programming the automation for overnight when live DJs aren't there, et cetera, et cetera. So I've been doing that for a long time too. In fact, you were talking about my projecting experience. I guess you would say I became a professional, like you said, in the Air Force. That would have been 1978 is when I first started running 35 millimeter. And it was reel to reel changeover, just like we have now. Had to get my license. Um, and that was 1978. And I started in radio 2 years later, 1980. So I've been doing both of these for over 40 years.
And you mentioned jumping around in time a little bit. And again, this
Yeah,
is
that's
something
fine.
we'll talk more about this, in the regular show too. You had right before the Mahoning, you ran an indoor theater. Now, was that the first indoor theater you had run?
No, my goodness. It's funny with projectionists and managers. It's a kind of a high turnover. When you get to be the age that I am, you've probably been with several different companies. I've run indoor theaters, drive-ins, several of them over the years. And I started, well, My first indoor was obviously the Air Force. I ran my Air Force Base Theater. I was the projectionist in 1978. I did that for 2 years. I got out of the Air Force in 1980. It's a shame. I had already been in 2 years when I got to the base where I learned how to run 35 millimeters. So I could only do it 2 years. Got out of the Air Force in 1980. And then I came back to Pennsylvania. And since 1980, I've always had two jobs. I've always had a job at a radio station and a job in a theater, whether it be indoor or a drive-in theater. I've done several over the years. I've worked for some great companies, and I've worked for some small companies too. And boy, I just wish all these places still existed, because a lot of them don't anymore.
Regarding the Mahoning, in the years that you have been there, are there any memories that really stand out, like crazy nights or fun times or weird bits of happenstance that you want to share with anybody?
Oh my goodness. Just, I guess I get the most enjoyment out of the crew itself. Wherever drive-in I've ever worked at, myself and the crew have always gotten along extremely well. And I guess because I tell them, as long as you get your work done, I want them to have a good time. I don't want them to take it, I want them to take their job seriously, but I want them to have fun while they're doing it. I don't care if they gather in a little corner and tell a couple of jokes, or, as long as they're doing the job, take a break, have some fun, stick your head out of the door, watch a little bit of the movie, and then come back in and do whatever needs to be done. And I think because I kind of run a loose atmosphere, the kids always seem to have a lot of fun. They always want to come back the next year. So I get my enjoyment out of watching the crew do their thing. And I also enjoy when the customers come in and say, boy, this is a great place. I love this. They come in there at the Mahoning. Now, in theaters past, you weren't always allowed in the projection booth. But here at the Mahoning, we do allow them to come into the booth. And the customers will come in, shake my hand. Wow, this is so neat. You still use real film, blah, blah, blah. And I get most of my enjoyment out of that, just seeing it all work, so to speak.
So we had a wild and woolly season in 2020.
Yes, we did.
In many, many ways. And at the same time, it was like the most successful season since I've been there, certainly. And, we keep expanding what we offer and the kind of shows we put on. And it's, as somebody who works there, it's very exciting. As a former patron, it's extremely exciting. Is there anything that, looking forward to 2021 season that has you excited, or you're looking to do or share with anybody?
I think the 2021 season is going to be our best season yet. Virgil, my partner, he has a talent for getting people, stars of the films or participants in the films, to actually make personal appearances at the drive-in. And a lot of places don't do that because it takes a certain kind of talent to get talent. And I knew I wanted him to come into the fold, so to speak. When I first met Virgil, I knew I wanted him to come in and be a part of things, because he seemed to be as interested as I was when I first came there. He had that same, I got to find out what goes on here. I have to be a part of this. So I knew that he would be the perfect fit. And he became the film agent for drive-in. I said, with your talent, I said, you would be a good film agent. Would you like to book the films for the drive-in? He said, sure, I'd like to try that. So, I gave him a few phone numbers. I said, these are the numbers to the studios, call them up and, get yourself established with them. And he did that. And later on, he started finding out some connections to get some talent to come to the drive-in, like Bruce Campbell last year, to make a personal appearance. So he's very valuable to the business. And so I let him off the chain, as I like to say. That's one of my favorite expressions. I let him off the chain and I let him run with it. So he's been very good on that end of things. And so basically I just oversee everything, and I run the projectors, and I have final say on what goes on, but everybody works so well together. I don't need to open up my big mouth very often. That's what I love about our crew. And you know it, you're a part of it. They work so well together. It's fun to walk around and just watch them do their thing and smile and say, man, they've got this. I don't have to micromanage. These people know what they're doing. I love that. I love that.
So I'd like to thank you, Jeff, for spending a little time with us here at Mahoning Drive-In Radio. We'll be talking much, much more over the course of this podcast. We're just beginning about stories about the theater and the business and film in general and our hopes and dreams and chocolate cake recipes. I do like chocolate cake.
I love chocolate cake.
So I thank you for joining us, and I thank you at home for joining us, and we will see you at the drive-in.
Ladies and gentlemen, thanks again for coming out tonight to the Mahoning Drive-In Theater. We hope you'll come back and see us again real soon. The exit is on the right-hand side of the screen at the front of the field, and most importantly, have a very safe trip home. Good night and God bless you.